the Lolo National Forest. And again, I'm not, I only have 20 minutes, so hopefully in the Q&A we can talk a little bit more about some other things. But again, it's very hard to trust the Forest Service. It's very hard to trust the administration when we see them saying one thing, and then we go out into the woods, and whether it's on the Biscuit or on the Bitterroot, we see something different happening. This is an area that was burned in the Mineral Prim Fire just last year in the Rattlesnake Wilderness area, and then it burned a lot into the lands owned by Plum Creek and the Gold Creek drainage. This is along the West Fork Gold Creek Trail. It's a trail that leads directly into the Rattlesnake Wilderness. This is within 500 feet of the wilderness boundary. This is also Unit 1 of a categorical exclusion timber sale that the Forest Service has proposed. It's a salvage timber sale. You can see a lot of green vegetation there. It was announced during Christmas of this past year. And for the skiers in the room, you can remember there was a lot of snow during that time. When it was announced, this area is probably under 6 or 7 feet of snow. We actually did this tour. We happened to do this tour before it was a timber sale in October with the EAC. This is some of the stuff that the EAC does. Again, this is within Unit 1 of this logging project, adjacent to the Rattlesnake Wilderness area, within 500 feet, adjacent to a roadless area. Again, this is within Unit 1. Again, this is what we see when we go out on the ground. This is what the Plum Creek land, where we were was kind of up in here. This is looking down Gold Creek. This is what the Plum Creek land looks like. Thinning and road building and fuel reduction and logging could stop forest fires. Wonder why Plum Creek land looks like this. Firefighters who are fighting this fire dubbed it the Black Desert. This is some of the other stuff that we see happening under the Bush administration's watch. These are all current logging projects. This is the East Rim timber sale on the Kaibab National Forest down in Arizona. Blue means cut. 95% of the trees in the Southwest are under 12 inches in diameter. These are enormous trees in a dispersed camping area, 48 miles from the nearest community. It's being done under the guise of fuel reduction and community protection. 2 minutes. This is the Jigsaw timber sale on the Umpqua National Forest. Junk Rock timber sale, Mount Hood National Forest. Insect infestation, they say. Blue means cut. Lemelo timber sale on the Umpqua again. Pig Out timber sale again on the Umpqua. Blue means cut. Winberry timber sale on the Willamette. This is the Berry Patch timber sale before. Berry Patch timber sale after. Clark timber sale, Willamette National Forest. Thankfully under litigation right now. Kelsey Whiskey timber sale, largest roadless area on Bureau of Land Management lands in Oregon. That's a view from above. That's what it looks like on the ground. This sale goes to auction on May 27th of this year. We expect 1,000 people to be at the auction protesting it. This is the Coquille timber sale on the Coos Bay district of the BLM in Oregon. Mr. Wilson timber sale, Medford BLM in Oregon again. Some of you might remember we brought this tree to Missoula last year, 440-year-old tree, cut down under the Bush administration's watch. How can we believe that they really want to protect our forest, restore our forest, when the same agency that is telling us that are the same agencies that are out there doing this? You know, when you talk about trust and collaboration, let's stay out of the roadless areas. Let's stop logging the old-growth forest. And then maybe we can sit down and start to work together and start to trust each other a little bit. But when it comes to the Forest Service, and I just got this today, and I put it up, and we're going to send it to Mark Ray because I think he'll like it too. But when it comes to the Forest Service, and this is Mark Ray, just the head, it's hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. That seems to be the mantra. I think I am probably out of time. Maybe in the Q&A we can talk about some of our vision for national forest protection and restoration. Vision that includes protecting and restoring watersheds, removing roads. The Forest Service has 440,000 miles of roads on our national forest. The Healthy Forest Restoration Act doesn't deal with roads at all. We got to deal with protecting our ancient old-growth forest. Imperiled wildlife, 421 species of wildlife that call national forest home require protections under the ESA. Clearly, we have to deal with returning fire's natural and beneficial role to our forests while we protect communities and invasive species. Obviously not on national forest land. Those of you here in Missoula can see the L. But we have a lot of work doing in removing and reducing the incident of insect infestation and exotic species on our national forests. So look forward to hearing a good lively talk in the Q&A section, and thank you very much. Okay, I'll get the lights. All right.
Well, I think this is a good time to open it up. David and Elizabeth just asked me as a moderator if I could just request that people be courteous and polite and try not to take too much time, and try to keep your comments brief if you have comments, and focus most of all on questions, I think. And I think everyone was just worried about one or two people trying to appropriate the rest of everybody's time. So if we could just try to be as courteous as possible, stick to the point, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion and debate. And we'll just, if you have a question, raise your hand, please.
I'd like to direct the question to Debbie, although Tom may want to chime in given some of the things he said. You pointed out that it's increasingly hard for the Forest Service to manage fire ecologically as people or as the suburbs are swerving up into the fire-prone zones. In 1993, after the big Mississippi River fire, the upper echelons of the Army Corps of Engineers finally started listening to their scientists who have been telling them for years, we can stop the little floods, but we can't control the big floods. And it's probably just a lot smarter from an ecological, from an economic, and from a public safety standpoint to buy up land in the floodplain and move people out of the floodplain. Then we're just going to keep having worse and worse flood damage because more people are moving into the floodplain thinking we're controlling the floods when we really can't. And I just wondered if there's been discussion in the Forest Service, maybe in connection with FEMA, to talk about the same thing, buying people out of the fire-prone zone, moving them out of it, and also helping local communities develop better land use planning to discourage people from moving up into the fire-prone zone.
I haven't heard any specific attempt to buy people out of the fire-prone zone. There's been discussion, a lot of discussion with insurance companies that may have the effect of people leaving that zone if they can't get insurance or if insurance rates get too high. There has been that sort of discussion. There's been a lot of that discussion. It's a difficult situation because that's not the Forest Service's jurisdiction. That's the state or the county or the local community's jurisdiction, and that's truly where the question, I think, needs to be answered. I agree, and I just want to clarify something because I've heard it so many times, and it also relates to your question, that yes, we will have catastrophic fires, and there will be instances where nobody's going to be able to do anything to stop them. It's true, Jack Cohen's work does show that you need to clear and have defensible space within 200 feet of your residence or whatever it is you're trying to protect. And what that's talking about is the heat, the spontaneous combustion or the radiant heat that will cause the structure to ignite. It's also true what your home is or structure is built of is very important. But what causes most homes to burn down are the embers that land on your deck or on your rain gutter or some other place where they smolder for a while and then they ignite. And what treating the wildland-urban interface on the federal lands and on the private lands does is it allows us to get firefighters in there. If the fuels have not been treated to a place that's safe to put firefighters there, we won't do it. And so we have no chance of saving the home, nor does the rural fire department. And so when we're talking about going beyond that 200 feet, it's not to prevent that heat from causing your house to catch on fire. It's to provide a safe ingress, egress, and place for the firefighters to fight it. So you have a crown fire that might get into that urban interface that's been treated. And in theory, and this is what we're testing, and I agree with everything that Tom said. In fact, I gave almost that same lecture to my employees about being careful and humility and all of that. But it's not about the heat part. It's about getting people in there safely and having that ground fire become a ground fire so that you can move people in there to help suppress fires. So that's sort of two answers to your one question. Did you want to?
I think and I don't understand the financial mechanics, but I think the state of Montana learned this last fire season that the federal government is not going to reimburse it with a blank check for whatever it costs to stand guard over people's homes, et cetera. That there's only going to be limited resources made available, which has freaked out our conservative Republican legislature because they had to come up with the money to balance the checkbook when they ended up with a much larger bill. So I think there are some financial changes taking place that's going to force the state legislature. It's not federal land. It's going to force the state legislature and state government to raise real questions about who should be responsible for protecting these homes. And as more of that burden gets shifted to the homeowner and the insurance company, I think you'll see some fairly dramatic changes. Some areas in Colorado have adopted land use ordinances where timbered areas on steep slopes you just can't build on because there's no land treatment, there's no forest treatment, there's no fuels treatment, there's nothing you do short of paving it to keep fire from burning the houses down. So we're creeping that way, and Montana got the first shocking financial news, the first real incentive to look a bit more critically at who should bear the costs associated with the decision to live in a dangerous place.
Effective fuel treatment is going to happen on some sort of consistent time interval. Dr. Wakamoto, what time interval would that be ecologically feasible? And Dr. Powers, at what time interval would that be economic?
Well, that's a very good question. My sense is that in the lower elevation ponderosa pine types, I think that it's very clearly that the fuel treatments have to be very different than we often think of. And we've been talking about this social context that we're talking about this, fire makes smoke. And the only way to treat ponderosa pine sites is really, in any economic sense, in my mind, with fire, because of the fine fuels that are there that are produced every year. Clearly that our forests are much less productive than some of the sites I'm used to dealing with. So I would say in terms of timing, certainly within 10 years, the treatment would have to be redone. It really depends on the basal area of the stand. In western Montana, a lot of basal area is barely 60 square feet, so that's really marginal to produce that much fuel. So you have a little more time. In contrast to that, in California, if you were to have 50 square feet, you could burn every year. You could carry a fire in the fuels every year, so it's a little different treatment. That answers your question in terms of the ecological side of things, yeah.
I'd just like to add a little bit to that. We're working with a lot of different a lot of projects where we're testing a lot of those things, and what we're finding is we don't have any scientific results yet, but a lot of the stands we can't run fire through them now as they exist because the fuels are too heavy. So we'll go in and mechanically treat them, whether that be through us going in there, cutting it down, piling it, and burning it. Very rarely it's through a commercial timber sale because the value isn't there. It's not commercial product. And then once we do that and we pile and remove that slash, then we run fire over it or under the stand. And then we come back in different time intervals, again, depending on the situation, depending on the ecosystem and how close it is to homes and that sort of thing. But our intent is, in that urban interface particularly, is to get it to a place that we can safely put fire through it on a regular interval.
The only thing I would add, I think it's true that the only cost-effective way of re-entering or retreating is with fire. Doing it mechanically is just way too costly. If one, and I think Dr. Fiedler's analysis indicates this, if one is willing to go to the drastic reduction in basal area that you saw in Matt Kohler's photograph, so very, very widely spaced trees. His analysis, and I think it's primarily based on computer modeling, but with some empirical support for the parameters used, was that you could go 50 years and the vast majority of the area would remain at relatively low fire risk. But that involves major change in the character of the forest, and whether that is ecologically appropriate or socially acceptable, I think is very, very unclear.
Oh.
Just as well.
My question's kind of more related to the procedural aspect of this whole thing. And you, Debbie, sort of alluded in your talk about kind of perpetuating this myth in my mind about how appeals and litigation are somehow tying up these fuel reduction projects long term. And I'm just wondering if you've seen, there's a really great study that just came out in northern Arizona. Helen Kortner, I think is her name. Hannah Kortner. That shows that the Forest Service doesn't even have a database that they can't track the fuel emissions for most of the region. And it just sort of reinforces this myth that has been really, in my mind, a central driver in this whole debate, that environmentalists are the bad guys here, and that every time the Forest Service tries to help the poor people in the community, the environmentalists stand in the way. I guess I'm just wondering what your response is to the data that Matthew put out, and then also data that's coming from the Forest Service database. Where did that come from, and when is it going to go away?
I can't respond to the national, what actually is happening nationally. I know on the Lolo National Forest, I think it would be safe to say, and we do track it, that about 95% of our projects are appealed. In Region 1, that number is a lot higher than it is across the nation. We don't have a national data. I think we're developing a national database that does track that. So in some parts of the country, that's true. I can't speak for the entire country. I'm not saying environmentalists are bad people at all either. What it does, though, is what's happened is the appeal process, I think, is gotten to the point where it's not doing what it was intended to do. There's a lot of boilerplate appeals and then boilerplate answers to appeals, and we're not really working through solutions. So it's not quite working. And because of that, that's where I agree with you, whether you agree with what the Act says or not, that collaborative process is the answer. Is sitting down and figuring out a way to work together and trust each other is really the answer. And as far as when are people going to stop talking about appeals and litigation, my guess is not for a while. And in some places it is very impactful, in other places it isn't. I think that was the first question. And then your second question, did you guys all hear the question? Okay. The second question was my reaction to Matthew's presentation. I have a lot of reactions, I guess, to it. Some of it I agree with. Some of it I would love to sit and debate slide by slide with. A couple of reactions, I guess, that I have is after a fire goes through, there are a lot of trees with green needles that are dead. They haven't dropped their needles yet. They have gotten to the point where they can't survive, and they will turn red the next year or the following year. Also, green needles are not a good way to determine if a tree has bugs in it. Whether you can see the bugs up on the trunk of the tree, but again, before the tree the tree is dying and has gone past the point of no return before the needles drop or turn red. So that's, I guess, one reaction. Another reaction more, I guess, in general, we've been talking about the Healthy Forest Restoration Act, and I think what my sense is, or at least my perception is, the slides that we were showing are certainly, I'm sure they're true, they're real timber sales that are occurring. They weren't done, I don't believe, under the Healthy Forest Restoration Act authority. I'm sure they were done under other authorities. This is too new, I would think. And they were done under different purpose and needs. And if you look at what the purpose for some of those projects were, I haven't seen them and I don't know, but I think it would be interesting to go back and look why those were proposed and did they meet the intent of what they were intending to do, rather than did they meet the intent of the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. And then the last thing I would say is, the before and after slides, again, I would like to know the dates of the pictures. You can take a picture right after it burns and everything looks pretty nice and pretty green. 3 years later, it would look very different even if it wasn't harvested. So those are questions that I have, and that's just my gut reaction.
The photos were taken in 1998 and 2000 by Jeff Jewell at the Ecology Center from a project on the Kootenai National Forest in northwest Montana. There's a number of things there that I feel I need to address, and I do know quite a bit about the appeals process and the issue of analysis paralysis, having FOIA'd the Forest Service numerous times on it. Regardless of the purpose and need of any project, who in this room thinks any of those ancient old-growth forests should be cut down? So I think that's part of the point. I think anybody could care less what kind of purpose and need you come up with. We've cut down all our ancient old-growth forests. I think one person in this room thought they should be cut down. Well, that's 1% out of 100. Who in this room thinks we should be logging and developing our roadless wildlands? Same sort of response, but we see the Forest Service continuing to do that. When it comes to the issue of appeals, we should not look at the fact that a project is appealed as necessarily a bad thing or that makes the project an abysmal failure. We should be thankful that here in America we have public lands and that we do have a public process. That public process is continually being eroded, just like public process throughout our society right now. But thank goodness people do care. Thank goodness there are nonprofit groups, many of them who volunteer their time to go out into the forest and watchdog and monitor what the Forest Service is doing. So a lot of times the reason these projects are appealed is because the Forest Service couples the good with the bad. Perfect example was the Lolo post-burn plan. We saw in the environmental community a lot of good things coming out of the Lolo post-burn plan. We saw a lot of roads that were going to be removed. We saw a lot of watershed restoration. We saw there were some old mines up in the 9 Mile area, and there was going to be some mine reclamation. In order to accept that part of the project, we had to accept a 35 million board foot timber sale. About half of the volume was coming from uninventoried roadless areas. So, again, part of the issue is the coupling of the good with the bad. I don't think anybody here thinks that our public lands or our environment can take much more damage. I don't want to see a robbing Peter to pay Paul approach to restoring our national forests. We can't take 2 steps forward, 2 steps backwards and say we're restoring the health of our forest. So I think that's an issue. And when it comes to appeals, the facts are there is this Northern Arizona study. They found that for such a politically contentious issue, there has been no comprehensive and systematic analysis of the outcomes of the Forest Service appeals process. What they did find in Region 1, which includes all of Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and portions of northern Idaho, they found that projects identified by the Forest Service as fuel reduction accounted for 1.9% of all appeals, and projects identified as prescribed burn accounted for 0.9%. When we FOIA'd Freedom of Information Act, which coincidentally is also being curtailed in certain instances, when we FOIA'd the Forest Service to find the only study that has said that appeals and litigation are a problem was a Forest Service study, which was called Factors Affecting Timely Mechanical Fuel Treatment Decisions. That was released on July 10th, 2002. On July 11th, the next day, we filed a FOIA with the Forest Service. Here's what we found. The GAO, keep in mind, when they looked at this 4 times, they did a pretty comprehensive job. Here's what we got back from the Forest Service. Quote, the time frame for gathering the information used to develop this report was limited to hours. Thus, much of the information was provided orally in telephone interviews with a variety of Forest Service employees throughout the country. So again, the General Accounting Office, they're not an environmental group, they're not the Forest Service, they're the nonpartisan investigative arm of Congress. They've looked into it 4 times. One of the other times they looked into it, they always find that appeals and litigation aren't as big of a deal. They're finding that upwards of 90% of the projects go through in a timely manner, so on and so forth. They also found in another report in September 2003 that federal agencies have failed to identify the lands at risk of fire. This was just from last September. Federal agencies have failed to make community fire protection a priority, and the main reason fuel reduction projects could not proceed were due to weather and the diversion of fuel reduction funds to fight wildfire. The report also found while opposition was not a leading factor in slowing fuel reduction projects, quote, while the issue of formal public resistance such as appeals and litigation has recently been contentious, only a few local land unit officials we visited with indicated that this type of resistance had delayed a particular fuel's treatment. I could go on and on about this for hours. Again, the environmental community, we support protecting forest, we support good projects. What we don't support is when we see them coupling the good with the bad, or when we see, it's just really unfortunate that all of a sudden analysis paralysis is part of the problem. Environmentalists are out to destroy the forest, which is just a fascinating thing for me, somebody who works on these issues. So I've taken way too much time answering that, so thank you.
First of all, I'd just like to say thank you all for taking the time to come tonight. It's really valuable for us to hear diversity of views. My question I'd like to direct to Debbie. Do you agree with the assertion that trust in the agency has declined, not only with environmental groups, but with the general public also? And also, if so, what could the agency do to build trust, particularly with the community wildfire protection plans that are being initiated?
I do absolutely agree that I like the conspiracy of optimism discussion. I've said the same thing over and over again, is although adding some things, I think back during the time of the American dream of owning your own home, people wanted that from their national forest. It was a positive thing. It wasn't just the agency. But as society changed and changed their views of what they wanted from the national forest, the agency didn't change. And I think we earned a lot of that distrust. On the other hand, I was brought in the late 70s, early 80s as sort of a group of resource professionals that were not foresters or the traditional Forest Service employees to bring some reality into that conspiracy of optimism. And I can honestly say over the last 25 years, there have been huge, huge changes. But we really do have a huge problem with perception and trust. I could go on and on about the Lolo Post Burn Project, about why I don't think it was good and bad, but I won't do that tonight. I think we're starting to maybe gain a little bit of that trust back, and I really agree that this Healthy Forest Restoration Act and the Healthy Forest Initiative and how we implement it is going to make or break the agency. We need to do the right thing for the right reasons at the right time in the right place and involve people. We can't think that we know it all. We can't go out and again repeat what was done in the past. Certainly, it's not an exact science. We will be wrong. I think somebody said that, but it's okay. We need to be able to try and adapt and do it small. Don't do it big. And again, the collaborative process. I truly believe getting people with diverse interests together, out on the ground, looking at projects, talking about things from everybody's point of view, will come up with a much better project that may not even be appealed or litigated. And again, to me, that's the important part, is having that discussion. I think the public absolutely need to be involved. They need to be involved more than they have been. What I was saying earlier, though, is the appeals process might not be the right avenue. But again, I just think the proof is going to be in the pudding. I mean, this is it for us, and we need to show people that we are doing the right thing. It's a very diverse agency. We're not a homogenous agency with groupthink anymore. The debates that go inside of our office are exactly the debate we're having tonight. And so we just need to be able to show that to people, and I think how we'll do that is in the implementation of projects.
Debbie, can I just add on to that? I guess as moderator I can do this. Can you speak to multi-party monitoring, which is a provision in the Act and was originally sold in Congress as a way to build some of these bridges and this trust back?
And that is something we also use. It's under the Stewardship Contracting Authority, and it allows us to, because we couldn't based on some other laws, but it allows us to have people such as yourselves that are interested in what we're doing, help us monitor and sort of be a third party to be out there looking at what it was we said we wanted to do, what was the intent of the project, was it effective? Is the first thing, or actually the first thing is, did we do what we said we were going to do? And the second question would be, was it effective? And if not, again, there's requirements in this act for us to go back and adapt. So again, that's another, I think, great opportunity for public involvement and actually an increase in public involvement.
And Matthew, would you be willing to participate in this sort of approach?
Oh yeah, we're, you know, I think, and looking out in the audience, I know there's a lot of people that work on these issues a lot, and I think you can appreciate the frustration of knowing that ancient forests are falling today, that roadless areas are being entered into, that sort of reality, and dealing with that, and then hearing that, you know, we're an agency or an administration that wants healthy forests. Can be a bit frustrating. My organization, we are a very small organization. We have participated in the Frenchtown Face project, which is a project that the Lolo National Forest is looking to implement. It's kind of one of these pre-scoping sort of a projects where you get the parties together early. We're doing something with some district rangers on both the Bitterroot and the Lolo called Breaking New Ground, a project that we're working with the forests and also the National Forest Foundation. And groups are doing this all around the country. The same people who are the ones filing the appeals are many of the same people who are the ones going out monitoring, going out talking to the Forest Service. Any district ranger or appeals officer will tell you that, or any project leader on the Lolo or the Bitterroot or any forest will tell you that the environmentalists that they probably know best are the ones that are the ones appealing what we feel are misguided projects, or a lot of times appeals can make a project better. You know, the Forest Service doesn't know anything. We sure don't know everything. I sure don't know everything, but you know, by getting people together, we can build better projects. So that is happening. For us, it's a little bit strange to be doing that when also, you know, we're planning to get 1,000 people out to protest an auction of an ancient old-growth sale in Oregon. But so be it. That's what we need to do, we feel, to protect and restore our national forests. So yeah, the environmental community is involved in all aspects. We're involved in the litigation in the courtroom. We're involved in the forest and in the halls of Congress. So.
What's striking in this discussion is that there are multiple levels of action, as you just alluded to, going on, and not just within the environmental community, but you know, many in this room, as you said, and certainly in the agency, there are multiple levels of action that are ongoing in implementation of any type of policy. But, and I'm going to direct this, of course, to Debbie, but I wonder what specifically, and I think Paul asked this as well, but to reiterate, you know, what specific public involvement steps can the agency take to help rebuild that trust? Multi-party monitoring is kind of a new, somewhat nebulous thing, doesn't have the appropriations, as you alluded to before, to maybe experiment with some different models for that. I think that holds some promise, but you know, I guess I open it up to discussion of maybe not just to you, but other folks in terms of brainstorming what actual ways to build trust at the local level that can kind of circumvent the national level political shenanigans that are obviously happening. I mean, nobody in this room would say that, you know, there isn't a national level political struggle that's been ongoing for 30 years. But, you know, if we do want to build trust at the local level, what specific things would you do?
I'll start, and then I'd love to hear from everybody else what they think, because I don't know it all. One of the things Matthew just talked about it, that I really believe in is getting people together before we know what we want to do. Before we scope, before we have a proposed action, get a group of people together, as we did in Frenchtown Face, and say, here's a piece of land. This is what we know about it. We asked the community and interested people, what do you know about it? And then they helped us develop, so is there anything we need to do here or not? And if there is, what are they? And in a collaborative way, come up with a proposed action and then the alternatives. It's really tough for everybody. We're all human. Once you have an idea, it's hard to get off that idea and do something different. And NEPA sets us up for that. So again, I think getting together, talking about things long before we have a proposed action is one way. The community fire plans, I think, are going to be an excellent way because a community has all kinds of incentive now to get together and figure out what they want to do within their interface before anything is proposed. So I think those kinds of things, again, really very, very early on do that. Forest plan revision. We're right now in the process of revising our forest plan. So that's really the document that sets the stage for everything we'll do in the future. People need to be involved. We're working with the Lolo, the Bitterroot, and the Flathead on revision. We've got 12 collaborative groups going right now, trying to help us work through a lot of those issues. So to me, again, it's just very, very early discussion. Anybody?
The thing that I would add is that if there aren't significant appropriations forthcoming, the Forest Service is going to be in a very difficult situation with the expectation that it's going to manage fuels and reduce fuels, but with no funding other than timber sales to do so. Meanwhile, without adequate appropriations, they'll continue to have to shift resources from other non-commercial, environmentally oriented forest management projects towards simply firefighting. So I think the national battle that you allude to is likely, I don't want to be completely pessimistic, but it's likely to play out in a not very good way, simply because the folks whose votes will be needed to provide the dollars, I think, expect significant commercial fiber to flow to mills as a result of fuel reduction. If those dollars are guided primarily towards the sorts of projects that I would think would help rebuild trust, I don't think there will be a lot of additional fiber flowing to mills. So I think the agency is in a difficult position given the political battle that has not been settled at the national level and given the balance of power at the national level. So I've heard even Mark Ray say that they're going to prove the environmentalists wrong by doing this right. Whether the appropriations will be provided to allow the agency to do that, I have real doubts. And if it's not available, I'm not sure it can be done right. The pressures will be to do it wrong, and it may well get done wrong, in which case Matthew has his work cut out for him, and we face, a hell of a period going forward.
I wanted to add, and if you want to say something in a minute, but I just wanted to add that nationally there is this big debate and there is pressure and there are people from all sides trying to make this happen to their benefit. I can honestly say as a forest supervisor, there's a whole lot of filters before it gets down to me and the projects I propose and the decisions I make. This year in particular, it's the first year under the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. We've been talking nationally, we've been talking regionally and locally about going out there and implementing those hazardous fuel reduction projects, which on my forest and on most forests are in terms of prescribed burning. There's been very little talk about commercial timber harvest in relation to this. Almost nothing. So in the first year of it, that hasn't become reality, but there certainly are those pressures, but just to know there's a lot of buffer between those pressures and the people that are making the decisions.
Well, I think the quickest way to get the trust of the environmental community, and I would think the trust of a lot of people in this room, is the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management need to stop logging ancient old-growth forest. The two previous chiefs of the Forest Service, Mike Dombeck and Jack Ward Thomas, who's a professor here, have called on the agency to do so, have said it would result in a lot of good faith and really be a step in the right direction. I don't think there's many people in this country that want to see those forests logged. And then, of course, the other area to just stay out of is the roadless wildlands, whether it's road building or logging or oil and gas development. We ain't growing any more wilderness areas or any more wildlands. We only have what we have, and we've developed pretty much most of the country and getting a pretty good start on the rest of the world too at the current state. I think one of the sort of big elephant in the room that we're addressing a little bit but not fully is the funding issue, both when the appropriations come, what time of the year, how those appropriations come, what sort of accounts they go into. And just real quickly alluding to my experience on the Frenchtown Face project, I really appreciated sitting down with the Lolo National Forest, and I think there were 8 or 10 of you in our office, and we were looking at maps and looking at the project, and we kind of came up with some prescribed burning, some mechanical fuel reduction, a lot of culvert work, some ORV education and some trail work, just some watershed restoration, closing some roads, decommissioning some roads, so on and so forth. Well, once it came time for the rubber to meet the road, and I think it was Fred maybe crunched the numbers on it, well, it turned out we had to kind of increase some of the logging component so that it was a 18.9 million board foot timber sale, and the revenue generated from that would only be enough to pay for about 35 to 40% of the ORV education, the watershed work, the culvert work, so on and so forth. And again, so often it seems like the Forest Service has a $9 billion maintenance backlog on roads. Why aren't we dealing with some road removal issues, clearly removing some of the old jammer roads? Why aren't we starting to build trust, replacing culverts so bull trout can go through them? Those are some simple areas where we can build trust. Part of the problem is there's no money to do that sort of work. It seems like all the money, there's obviously some, but it seems like the bulk of the money is always going into the resource extractive activities. So Congress has to play a real key role in this. Some of us are working, the environmentalists are working with the community forest groups and the restoration practitioners to go to Congress and say, hey, let's get $5 million for Western Montana so we can do X, Y, and Z. It has nothing to do with logging or fuel reduction because, quite frankly, I'm not convinced that the restoration priorities of our national forest involve cutting more trees. We have the watersheds and the roads that we need to take care of as well. So funding is definitely an issue.
Well, I appreciate Matt talking about the funding issue because that's really what I often feel that the agencies are kind of caught in between because you have these statements and laws and then no funding to come and follow through to do what you say. I mean, that's the real issue. I do want to point out that this lack of funding is not surprising. When you look at other agencies, we've been talking about the BLM and the Forest Service because they cut trees. But if we look at the National Park Service, you've probably heard all the different issues that have come out about people saying, well, we can't even clean the shitters, or we close entrances and things because we can't afford it. Well, and that's because we have national parks because the people of this country have said we can afford them. We can afford to have these parks. And any park is a sink where you put money in and it goes away. The ticket taking, you often hear people talk about park superintendents being primarily ticket takers. It's because that's the only time they get any funding back. In contrast to that, through the 50s, through the 70s, and the 80s, the Forest Service wore the white hat because they brought something back to the Congress. They brought money back in. So it wasn't just a big hole where you just poured money in and you felt good. And that's what's happening now. We've really reduced all the harvesting in the forest. I mean, the time in the 80s where we realized, particularly in Montana, that we were over-harvesting, that we couldn't sustain the volume that we were cutting, forest supervisors stood there and said, we can't really do that, even though historically the supervisors before them, cut cut big areas of North Idaho to meet those different cuts. So you have to put that in a perspective that we don't have that funding coming in. We're not cutting those trees. And so, as Tom pointed out, the only way we can realistically do some of these projects, unless this country is willing to invest in that, is we won't get the changes, no matter how much we think about it. And I want to point out, because I've been playing this role of talking about the ecology of the forest, that many of our, quote, as Matthew used the term, ancient forests, they're about at the rotation. If you look at the Pacific Northwest, we're dealing with 600-year-old trees that are about at the rotation. And my counterpart at the University of Washington, Jim Agee, as a fire ecologist, talked about that during the Clinton's forest plan and said, hey, wait a minute, what are we doing here about the 400-year-old trees or the 200-year-old trees, so that when these 600-year-old trees burn right to the ground and begin this whole process again, that we have some place for the spotted owl to go. And that's not been the approach. They just kind of ignored everything he said there, and they said, no, we're going to put a line around it and we're going to protect it. Well, there's a lot of lightning that's going to come down and light those things up. So we may want to keep those forests around. It's, but it may not be our choice.
Can I just correct? It's not cuts, it's service level adjustments. That's what they call them these days. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still not clear to me what the Act says in terms of where fuel reduction is going to take place. And I think we kind of heard two different pictures painted. Seems like from Debbie that this would be going on in the wildland urban interface, which was, I think you said, a half a mile from structures or maybe a mile and a half, even depending on topography. And then from Dr. Power, you were talking about that there were people that were advocating that this go on much deeper into the backcountry, and even some idea of it happening in the woods or something like that. So is the Act that nebulous that there could be those kinds of different pictures painted, or is it decided locally, or how is that?
The Act actually says at least 50% of the projects will be done in the wildland urban interface. So that leaves 50% to be done someplace else. But then it goes on to say it will be done in condition class 2 or 3, which are those areas where the fire return intervals are out of whack, the vegetation is not what it used to be, and the system isn't operating as it would naturally. So in that other 50%, it has to be condition class 2 or 3, but could be in the backcountry. It specifically excludes wilderness and wilderness study areas.
What about roadless?
It does not exclude roadless. No. And there is some specific language about old growth and what you can and cannot do in old growth stands.
How do you decide the class 2 and class 3?
There's scientific designations. I don't know, maybe you can explain that better than I.
Yeah, it's really an evaluation of the number of fire rotations that have been missed that were historically appropriate for those types. So the 3 is the most out of whack, if we were just to describe it that way, from the natural process, the historic process that's gone on those sites. So it's probably major changes in species composition, density of the trees, as well as the occurrence of fire. So, as I said, lodgepole pine that has a mean fire interval of 65 to 150 years, those stands typically would not be in condition to class 3 because they haven't missed that many rotations. In contrast to the lower elevation forests where fires were very frequent and they could be far more changed from that system, from the historic past.
Yeah, one other important point to keep in mind with the condition classes, as with all the mapping that's been done, and I know the folks at the Fire Sciences Lab are looking at, Jay, you know the name, what is it, Landsat? Is that the new, what was it called? Landfire. There's a new sort of a modeling program. Part of the problem is this is such a coarse analysis. If you look at some, it's not, there's, what's funny is we started this in 2000, had a big fire season. Well, there were only 39 million acres at risk in 2000. We've steadily gone up to now where we are 190 million acres at risk of catastrophic fire. And a lot of this, it's just been done on a very coarse level. It hasn't been ground truthed. It hasn't been done on the ground. And I think some of the new programs that the Forest Service and the Fire Science Lab in particular are looking at might help so that, as the GAO just said in September, the Forest Service has failed to identify the lands at risk. So that's one of the issue. Back to the funding, it's 50% of the dollars. So not necessarily 50% of the projects, like 20 projects done in the wildland-urban interface, 20 done elsewhere. One of the issues we had was not only that we felt the wildland-urban interface definitions were a bit too broad and all-encompassing, but typically doing fuel reduction work in those areas are more expensive. So you could see, 50% of the funding there. Well, if it's twice as much, 20% as much, who knows? It's more expensive. So you're not going to be treating nearly as many acres. So that's another issue kind of to tuck away and think about too.
And I would just add that was a hotly debated issue, getting it to 50%. So that my comments were tied not just to this legislation, but to the debate that was going on in the array of political forces. This act was a compromise in which I forget what, the pro-fiber folks wanted almost no limitation on where the fuel reduction activities would take place. And so that's part of that ongoing battle at the national level that hasn't been settled yet.
I just want to add one thing, and I agree with what's been said, but by the time it trickles down to me, the direction that I'm getting and what I'm striving for, and we're talking about in Region 1, is 75 to 80% of our fuels treatment, not necessarily just under HFRA, but in total, will be in the urban interface, and that's by acres, not by dollars.
Can I just add, most of the discussion thus far has been on Class 2 and 3, but I did want to point out, I think most of the litigation will turn in that the Act has language which basically reads, federal land on which wind throw or blow down, ice storm damage, the existence of an epidemic disease or insects, or the presence of such an epidemic on immediately adjacent land and the imminent risk it will spread poses a significant threat to an ecosystem component. And that was some of the compromised language that was put in there that I think most of the future litigation will probably turn on.
Mm-hmm.
I think we only have time for another question or two.
Dave's got one.
Are you bringing us beer?
Yeah, really. Go all night.
Dave.
Well, the part on trust I thought was interesting. I'm not even in the right dimension to address trust when it comes to this issue. I feel like it's like not telling someone to have peace without any justice or something. For me, like the biggest thing, is what happens on the ground. That's what I care about the most. I don't care if people can talk for thousands of hours, they can go on forever, do whatever they want. But when it happens on the ground, really, I take a lot of interest in it. There's a lot of professors at this school that are like that too. That's why I really like it here. But so what part of this have we seen on the ground is the categorical exclusions. And the LOLO has been really pumping these out, and it's been really a big concern of mine recently. We've been to the mineral prim fire, which turned into the mineral salvage, and that was in a spruce forest where there was a light underburn. You saw the pictures of it, and then up the slopes was a lodgepole that burned stand replacement, and it didn't really seem like, I'm not sure if the goal is fuels reduction there, but it wouldn't really apply to that type, it seems. And then that's just one issue. Then we get into the issue of the units go right up to the wilderness boundary. The forest is native forest. Invasives will be increased. Fragmentation will be increased. And so I have a hard time seeing that this is such a light impact that I wonder, why were we shut out of the process in terms of commenting and this group collaboration sort of seems like a cop-out to me. They want to keep us out, really. But then say, well, let's say that we'll bring them in, but really what we're doing is keeping them out. The West Fork Petty Creek salvage, I've been there twice now. 31 units sprinkled across the ridge. It looks like to me like fragmentation of contiguous forest and turning existing fragmented areas into remnant forest. A lot of horrible impacts on wildlife. Reusing roads that maybe we should be looking at those road systems and say, should we be closing these road systems? Instead, we're going in there to get these little tiny units that are sprinkled throughout the landscape. In the talk about the HFI, there was the word biodiversity just stuck out at me. That word is just trying to understand what that means in management is such a difficult task for us right now. And to say that the HFI is going to increase biodiversity, at the same time we see this stuff going on, which is against known problems in forestry. We know that fragmentation is not good for biodiversity. We know that loss of interior habitat is bad for biodiversity. We know that we're working with a landscape that's already been tilted in certain ways. So we have to be careful about, the caution and the care about not pushing it other ways real hard, not acting like everything's just 100% right here. Like the issue with old growth that drives me crazy is that all these districts always tend to look at the remaining old growth and say, this is 100% of what we have left. So therefore we can continually chip away at it. Then chip away. The next year, this is 100% of what we have left. We can chip away. And it never stops. It never stops. And pretty soon we're left with this tiny little bit, and it's still 100% of what we have left. We can take some of it.
That's not right.
I'm sorry for being kind of scattered. I just have a lot of things I'd love to talk about, but really I just want to ask you about Debbie Austin about the categorical exclusions that are occurring pretty deep into the adjacent to roadless areas. The Gold Creek, which I haven't got to see yet, is adjacent to the bordering the Stony Mountain Inventory Roadless area. Why are they going so back much into the backcountry? And what sort of benefits is that supposed to bring to the forest health?
And all of those projects have different reasons. None of them, again, are done under the HFRA, but they all have different reasons for harvesting. Some of them are because of insect infestation. Some of them are because of fuel reduction. Not many of them are yet. And some are with the purpose of providing wood products. So that, we're being honest about that. My direction to the district rangers is if you're salvaging to provide wood products, say that. Don't make up a reason. And so they're all different. They're all very different. In terms of why are we going way back there, some of it's opportunity. Actually, in the categorical exclusions, we're doing everything off of existing roads. We're not entering brand new areas. They're areas that have been managed and treated in the past. Bordering inventoried roadless or bordering wilderness or bordering unroaded, it's almost, so where does it end? If that's the boundary, is there a buffer or isn't there a buffer? And those are some of the questions that we're talking about in forest plan revision. We've been working a lot with a lot of environmental groups, conservation groups, and industry to talk about where is it appropriate. And the answer keeps coming back to us within the area that's already roaded. And so that's what's leading us in that direction. We're trying to stay out of inventoried roadless, out of some of those sensitive habitats that are in danger of fragmentation. In terms of the salvage component of it. And so that's where that leads you, is to the places that are roaded. And then you end up with cumulative effects concerns. So those are all the kinds of things that we look at and we talk about. There certainly was no intention to keep people out. I know we did have a lot of projects and a lot of things did happen different times of the year. But my intention is to get everybody involved. Whoever needs to be involved or wants to be involved needs that opportunity.
With the matrix landscape being so heavily eroded, and it also being such an important area for us to really achieve goals if we want to really achieve forest health, how are you going to decide which areas to stay out of? Since we have such a vast road system, and a lot of it enters beautiful forested areas that are not in need of any sort of treatment.
Yeah, we're actually looking at that. I was just at a meeting in Whitefish the last 2 days and looking at exactly that. We're doing a forest-wide roads analysis. Where do we want roads? Where don't we want roads? What do we want them for? So that's in the process of being done. I can honestly say on the Lolo National Forest over the last, I can't remember, it's 5 or 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, we have decommissioned, I'm thinking it's exponentially more road than we've built. I mean, we are on the downward trend in terms of miles. We have a lot out there, but we have actually been making a concerted effort to figure out what roads do we want to eliminate from the landscape and then doing it. We've been pretty successful at getting that funding.
I just wanted to say that one of the reasons I think that this piece of legislation got bipartisan support was because of the fear of wildfires and what was happening. It was a big fire in California at that time. And I think it was a way of people in Congress to appease the public. But I don't think that the public really supports it. I mean, I think that the Forest Service as an agency should represent what the people want. And I'm not really getting that sense, I guess. Because this piece of legislation may be okay for Montana in certain areas, and I think that what you're doing in a lot of the Lolo National Forest is probably appropriate for fire reduction. But when we apply that to Oregon and Washington, I don't think that we need to make those forests park-like. You know, it just doesn't make sense, and that's increasing fire hazard. So I just think that that's one of the things that would increase trust, maybe just to have people's support, or I guess our input really taken into consideration. A lot of the letters I get back from the Forest Service about certain sales say, well, our primary duty is to provide revenue for local timber mills. And I'd like to see their primary duty to be what the people want in their public land.
And hopefully you're not getting those letters from me. But I guess there's I see sort of two parts of our democratic process at play here. Congress and the president, well, Congress passed and president signed the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. Our democratic process is that you, the people, we, the people, elect these people to represent us and make these laws. And then the agency's mission is to carry out the laws because they were brought forth by the people through their representatives. Whether or not that process works is not up to me, and I can't go against it. I mean, once it's law, it's law. The other part of our democratic process is public involvement and the ability for us as American citizens to be able to question our government and ask questions and say why and appeal and litigate. And that's where we have the opportunity to talk about, so how do we do it? How do we implement it? Because we can't just ignore that Congress and the president say we need to do this. I mean, that again is a part of how our system works. So I agree. It goes back to on the ground local discussions about what's right for here.
I'm going to ask, I know we can stay all night, but I'm going to go home and eat.
Me too.
I'm going to give you the last question in the back.
I agree with what you said, and we are. We're looking at really increasing our ability to use wildland fire use, and that's where we have a natural ignition and we monitor it. We don't have to go in with full suppression. And we're looking at doing that on as many acres as we can without jeopardizing, again, the communities and the infrastructure that's out there. Something that we've done already without even having that opportunity available to us, we did it last summer a lot, is we had huge fires burning, as everybody knows. We did some major suppression on the edges of those fires that were around towns, watersheds, municipal watersheds. And then the rest of it, we said, don't worry. And it burned up into the wilderness or the backcountry or wherever. So we are starting to do that. It's a really fine line between letting that happen and then liability if something goes wrong. But we are looking at wildland fire use and prescribed fire a lot more in this forest plan than we did it the first time.
That is politically very, very difficult.
Oh, it is. It's those decisions I lie awake at night.
No, it's how you solve the results of past problems while trying to make progress on the current set of problems.
Yeah.
Mind-boggling in a setting where there's almost no resources available. And that's one of the problems, and I'm not picking on the Forest Service. One could say this about educators in some way too, but the Forest Service has argued forever for its since its earliest years that it can make the forest pay for themselves.
Right.
You know, that the original forest reserves.
That when I first,
Congress was just told we will. We are going to make these forests pay for
when I
themselves.
first was
and Congress
hired,
keeps saying,
that was the
well,
deal.
when?
Yeah, I know. When I first was hired, that was, we're the only federal agency that operates in the black.
Yeah.
That was a big
That's
deal.
right.
That's a big deal.
Even when it wasn't entirely true.
Right, but that's another point.
But that's so that, trying to escape that legacy, the forests were created on the promise that they not only would not cost anything,
They would make
they would
money.
generate revenues.
Yeah.
And so now we're cornered.
Yeah, there are no easy answers.
Good job, Debbie. I'm Steve Kimball. I'm the acting director of the Carter.
Oh, great.